When a broken man lost his fortune, his family, and even his will to live, he sat on a park bench until an 8-year-old girl offered him her only piece of candy. She then invited him home for dinner with her and her grandmother, a simple meal that would spark a journey destined to change not only his life but theirs as well. The ending will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The November wind cut through Central Park with a sharpness that made William Harris pull his wrinkled suit jacket tighter around his shoulders. Evening shadows stretched long across the frozen ground as he sat hunched on the familiar bench, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. His stomach cramped with hunger. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, but somehow food seemed pointless when everything else had fallen apart. 3 days ago he'd been the man people pointed to with admiration, successful, respected, a husband and father. Today he was nothing. His wife had admitted that the child he'd raised for 8 years wasn't his. His best friend Marcus, the man he'd trusted most, was the real father. The revelation had shattered something inside him that could never be repaired. Bank accounts frozen pending divorce proceedings. The company board had stripped him of his title. His credit cards were maxed from legal fees, and the few friends he thought he could count on had stopped returning his calls. The shelter downtown had been full for 3 nights running. The $23 in his wallet might buy food for a few days if he was careful, but the gnawing emptiness in his stomach felt like a physical representation of the void in his chest. "Mister?" The small voice made him look up sharply. A girl stood several feet away, maybe 8 years old, wearing a faded winter coat held together with safety pins. Her sneakers had holes near the toes and her hair was braided in small careful plaits. Despite her obvious poverty, her face was clean and her expression kind. "What?" His voice came out harsher than intended, rough from hours of silence and emotional exhaustion. She didn't flinch at his tone, which surprised him. Most children would have run from a disheveled stranger sitting alone on a park bench after dark. Instead she studied him with those serious eyes, her head tilted slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you okay? You look really cold and hungry." The simple question hit him with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had shown genuine concern for his well-being? Even in his marriage, conversations had been about schedules, obligations, and maintaining appearances. This child's direct compassion was startling. William let out a harsh laugh that sounded more like a bark. "I'm fine, go home before it gets darker." A couple walking their small dog glanced over at his outburst, then hurried past with uncomfortable expressions. He felt heat crawl up his neck. Once again he was the object of judgment and whispered speculation. But the girl remained unmoved, continuing to study him with that peculiar mixture of concern and determination. "You don't look fine," she said matter-of-factly. "You look like my grandma did when Papa died, and she didn't eat for 3 days, sad and hungry and cold all at the same time." Her words were so precise, so lacking in artifice, that they cut through his defenses like a blade. She stepped closer, revealing what she held in her mittened hand, a wrapped mint candy, the kind given out at restaurants or church services. "My grandma says when people are hurting, sometimes sharing helps. Do you want this? It's all I have right now, but we can split it if you want." The gesture was so unexpected, so purely generous, that it took his breath away. Here was a child who clearly had very little, offering to share her only candy with a complete stranger who'd been nothing but rude to her. The mint probably cost less than 50 cents, but in this moment it represented something infinitely more valuable. William stared at the candy, his chest tightening with emotions he couldn't name. When had he last encountered such selfless kindness? In his world of business deals and social climbing, generosity always came with strings attached, with expectations of reciprocal benefit. This girl expected nothing in return. She simply saw someone in pain and wanted to help. "I don't need your pity," he said, but the words came out weaker than he intended, lacking the force of genuine rejection. "It's not pity," she replied with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. "You just look like you need someone to care about you. My grandma makes soup every night, not much, but it's warm and it fills you up. You could come eat with us if you want." William felt his throat close. The invitation was so casual, so naturally offered, that it seemed impossible. Here was a child, a stranger, inviting him to share what was probably her family's only meal of the day. The generosity was staggering, especially coming from someone who obviously needed every scrap of food they could get. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me, I could be dangerous." The girl considered this seriously, as if it were a reasonable concern that deserved thoughtful response. "You could be," she agreed, "but you're not. Dangerous people don't sit on benches crying when they think nobody's watching. And you talk like my teacher, like someone who's educated and careful with words. Grandma says you can tell a lot about people by how they talk and whether they look you in the eyes when they speak." Her perceptiveness was unsettling. William realized she was right. He had been crying earlier when he thought the park was empty, and despite his current circumstances, his vocabulary and pronunciation still reflected his education and former status. This child had observed him carefully and made reasoned judgments about his character. "Because you look hungry," she continued, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, "and because Grandma always says we help when we can, even if we don't have much, sometimes especially then." The matter-of-fact compassion in her voice nearly broke him. When had he last encountered such genuine kindness? When had he last felt that someone cared about his well-being without wanting something in return? "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, the hostility replaced by something approaching wonder. "Naomi Brooks." "What's yours?" "William Harris." He looked at the mint in her outstretched hand, then back at her earnest face, his pride warred with his desperate hunger and soul-deep loneliness. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "And yes, Naomi, yes, I'd like that soup very much." Her face lit up with a smile so pure and delighted that it seemed to brighten the gathering darkness around them. "Good, Grandma will be happy. She always says food tastes better when it's shared." They walked together through narrow streets that William had never truly seen despite living in the city for over a decade. From his penthouse apartment and chauffeured cars, he'd observed New York from above and behind tinted glass. Now, at street level, he noticed details that had been invisible before: the way steam rose from manholes like urban geysers, the neon signs flickering over corner bodegas advertising phone cards and lottery tickets, the small communities that formed around laundromats and bus stops. Naomi chattered as they walked, her voice bright despite the cold. She told him about her school, where she was in 3rd grade and loved reading but struggled with math. She mentioned her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who brought extra sandwiches for kids who forgot their lunch. She talked about her best friend Keisha, who lived 2 blocks over and had a cat named Muffin. Her casual conversation revealed glimpses of a life lived close to the edge. She mentioned that Grandma worked late some nights, doing sewing for the ladies upstairs, and that they sometimes ate dinner at the community center when they have the free meals. But there was no self-pity in her voice, no sense that she considered herself deprived. She spoke of their circumstances with the same matter-of-fact acceptance she'd shown when offering her candy. William found himself studying her as they walked. Despite her obvious poverty, the too large coat, the worn shoes, the carefully mended mittens, there was a dignity about her that reminded him of something he'd lost. She carried herself with confidence, greeted neighbors who passed them on the street, and seemed genuinely happy despite circumstances that would have left him feeling sorry for himself. The building they stopped at was a testament to urban decay: red brick darkened with decades of soot, paint peeling from window frames, a front door that hung slightly askew on worn hinges. The entrance hall smelled of old cooking, dampness, and the accumulated presence of too many people living in too small a space. But it was clean, he noticed. Someone had swept the stairs recently and wiped down the mailboxes. As they climbed to the 3rd floor, William felt a mix of shame and desperate gratitude that was almost overwhelming. When had he fallen so low that a child's charity was his only hope for a warm meal? 6 months ago, he'd hosted dinner parties that cost more than some families spent on food in a year. Now he was following an 8-year-old girl up the stairs of a tenement building, dependent on the kindness of strangers for basic survival. "Grandma," Naomi called as they reached a narrow apartment door that had been painted multiple times, each layer showing through where the current coat had chipped away. "I brought someone who needs soup." The door opened to reveal a woman of perhaps 65, though her weathered face suggested someone who'd lived a hard life that had aged her beyond her years. She was thin but sturdy, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent dark eyes that immediately fixed on William with a mixture of surprise and protective wariness. Martha Brooks took in the scene quickly, her granddaughter standing beside a well-dressed but obviously desperate stranger, a man whose expensive clothes couldn't hide the telltale signs of someone who'd been sleeping rough. She noticed his hollow cheeks, the way he swayed slightly from hunger and exhaustion, the particular kind of defeat that comes from having nowhere to go. "Naomi, honey, what did I tell you about bringing strangers home?" But her voice was gentle, more concerned than angry. William could hear the love beneath the mild reproach. "He's hungry, Grandma. Really, really hungry, and he's been sleeping outside." Naomi's voice carried that matter-of-fact compassion that had first disarmed William. "I told him about your soup." Martha studied William more carefully, her experienced eyes cataloging details that told a story. She'd worked as a nurse's aide for 30 years before a back injury forced her retirement, and she'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. This man wasn't a typical vagrant. His posture, his vocabulary, the quality of his clothes all suggested someone who'd fallen from a much greater height. "You running from the law?" she asked directly, her voice neither hostile nor welcoming. "No, ma'am." William's voice was hoarse with disuse and emotion. "Just running from everything else, I suppose." "Family?" The simple question hit him like a physical blow. "Not anymore," he managed, the words coming out broken and raw. Martha's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard that particular tone before, the sound of someone whose world had been completely upended, who'd lost not just possessions but identity itself. "What happened to you?" Her tone remained cautious but had lost its sharp edge. The story poured out of him then, words tumbling over each other as if a dam had burst. He told her about the betrayal, about discovering that his son wasn't his biological child, about his best friend's deception spanning 8 years. He described the public humiliation, the frozen bank accounts, the way his entire social circle had evaporated the moment his status changed. Martha listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy that encouraged him to continue. When he finished, she asked the most practical question: "When did you last eat a real meal?" 2 days ago, maybe 3, I lost track." The admission felt like a confession of failure. Martha's expression underwent a subtle but significant transformation. The wariness didn't disappear entirely, but it was joined by something that looked like understanding, even compassion. "Well," she said after a long moment, "we can't let someone starve on our doorstep, can we? Come in, but wipe your feet. This may not be much, but it's clean." William felt tears threaten for the first time since his world had collapsed. "I don't want to impose, it isn't an imposition," Martha said, gentler now. "This is what people do for each other. Take the bed, warm beats concrete." The apartment was tiny, essentially one room that served as living room, dining room, and kitchen, with what appeared to be a small bedroom visible through a partially open door. But everything was immaculately clean and carefully organized. Mismatched furniture had been arranged to create distinct areas: a small table with 3 chairs near the kitchenette, a worn sofa facing an old television, shelves made from boards and cinder blocks holding books and carefully preserved photographs. The smell that filled the apartment was heavenly, something savory and warming that made William's empty stomach clench with desperate hunger. Martha moved efficiently around the small kitchen space, ladling soup from a pot into 3 bowls while Naomi set the table with practiced movements that spoke of established routine. The soup, when it was placed before him, looked like ambrosia. It was a hearty mixture of beans, vegetables, and what appeared to be the last scraps of some chicken, thick enough to be a meal in itself. Martha had clearly stretched whatever ingredients she had to create something nourishing and filling. The bread that accompanied it was homemade, dense and substantial. William tried to eat slowly despite his ravenous hunger, acutely aware that this might be the only substantial meal these two had for the day. But his body betrayed him. After 2 days without food, his hands shook as he lifted the spoon, and he had to concentrate to keep from wolfing down the soup like an animal. The first spoonful was a revelation. It wasn't just the taste, though it was delicious, it was the warmth that seemed to spread through his entire body, reaching places that had been cold for longer than just the past few days. This wasn't just food, it was care made tangible, love expressed through the simple act of sharing what little they had. "This is incredible," he said quietly, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "Thank you." Martha watched him carefully, noting how he tried to maintain dignity despite obvious desperation, how gently he handled the bowl as if afraid of breaking something precious. "What did you do before all this?" she asked. I owned an import-export company, had about 200 employees. The words felt strange in his mouth, like describing someone else's life. Naomi looked up from her soup, eyes wide with a child's fascination with scale. You were rich, like really rich. I thought I was, William said with a sad smile that held no bitterness. Turns out I was just lucky for a while. And luck runs out, money runs out too, Martha said with the practical wisdom of someone who'd learned to live without it. But some things don't. She gestured around the tiny apartment. Naomi and I lost everything 3 years ago when her parents died, and I couldn't work anymore after my back injury. Lost our house, most of our belongings, had to move here, but we still had each other. William looked between them, this grandmother and granddaughter who'd faced their own devastating losses, but somehow maintained hope, kindness, and an unshakable bond. How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything falls apart? One day at a time, Martha said simply. You focus on what you still have instead of what you've lost. And you help when you can. Even if it's just a bowl of soup or a kind word. Sometimes that's enough to make the difference. Like tonight, Naomi added with a smile that seemed to light up the entire apartment. Grandma always says sharing makes everything taste better. As the meal continued, William felt something fundamental shifting inside him. The physical warmth of the soup was spreading through his body, but more importantly, the warmth of their acceptance was reaching parts of his soul that had been frozen since his world collapsed. These two people who had every reason to be bitter about their own circumstances had opened their home and hearts to a complete stranger without hesitation or expectation of reward. When the bowls were finally empty, Martha studied him with the assessing gaze of someone making an important decision. Where are you staying tonight? The park bench, William admitted, the words heavy with shame. The shelter downtown has been full for 3 nights. Martha was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded on the table as she weighed options and possibilities. Finally she came to a conclusion that surprised even herself. The couch folds out into a bed. It's not comfortable and it's not permanent, but it's warmer than concrete. You can stay tonight. William felt his throat close with emotion. I couldn't. I mean, you've already done so much. It isn't an imposition. Martha said, gentler now. This is what people do for each other. Take the bed, warm beats concrete. William felt tears threatening, the first genuine tears he'd shed since his world had fallen apart. I don't know how to repay this kindness. You don't repay it, Martha said, her voice gentle but firm. You get back on your feet, and then you help the next person who needs it. That's how it works. That's how we keep humanity alive in a world that sometimes seems determined to kill it. As Martha and Naomi prepared the fold-out couch with clean sheets and a warm blanket, William sat in quiet amazement at the turn his life had taken. 12 hours ago he'd been sitting on a frozen park bench contemplating whether existence was worth the pain it brought. Now he was surrounded by warmth, fed and accepted by two people who had every reason to turn him away but had chosen instead to show him the kind of radical kindness he'd never encountered in his former life of wealth and status. That night, lying on the thin mattress in the warm apartment, listening to the quiet sounds of a family settling in for sleep, William Harris began to believe that maybe, somehow, he could learn not just to survive but to truly live again. The next few weeks established a routine that slowly brought William back from the edge of despair. Martha made it clear the arrangement was temporary. We'll help you get steady on your feet, but you need to find your own place eventually. Yet she gave him the stability and support he needed to begin rebuilding from nothing. She watched him carefully in those first days, noting how he startled at noises, stared into space processing his losses, and sometimes woke in the night calling names from his former life. But she also saw his character. He insisted on washing dishes despite his state, helped Naomi with homework even when distracted, and tried to contribute what little money he had left despite their protests. You're not a bad man, she told him one evening while Naomi worked on a school project. Just a broken one, and broken can be fixed if you're willing to do the work. I don't know where to start, William admitted. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about life, it was built on lies or things that weren't really mine. Martha set down her sewing. Then start with what's real. You're alive, you're safe, and you have people who care what happens to you. Build from there. Her practical wisdom began to pierce the fog of depression. William started walking the neighborhood, not seeking anything but noticing what he had once overlooked. He helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, played cards with Naomi after school, and gradually began to feel human again, rather than a collection of regrets. After 3 weeks, Martha made an announcement that both terrified and motivated him. "There's a job placement program downtown. You're going tomorrow to sign up." "Martha, I don't think I'm ready." Panic rose in his chest. "You're as ready as you'll ever be sitting here feeling sorry for yourself. Naomi and I need our space back, and you need to move forward instead of just existing. We've given you time to heal. Now you build something new." The program was humbling but constructive. William found himself among men who had fallen from various heights: injured construction workers, veterans with trauma, middle managers downsized out of existence. Counselors helped him navigate starting over with no references, no address, and gaps in his record. His first job was loading trucks for minimum wage, a position unimaginable months earlier but now a lifeline. The work was brutally physical for someone used to a desk, but William embraced it with determination, knowing it was his only path back to independence. Every blister, every ache in his shoulders felt like penance for years of comfort taken for granted. More importantly, exhaustion brought peace. Once his mind had raced with strategies and deals, now the simple act of moving boxes left him too tired for endless self-recrimination. Martha allowed him to stay on the couch while he saved money. "Until you're stable," she said, "but you pay what you can toward food, and you help with Naomi's schoolwork and whatever else needs doing." Living so close revealed their daily struggles in ways that broke his heart. Martha's disability check barely covered rent, and her sewing work stretched to cover food, utilities, and Naomi's school expenses. He watched them make choices he'd never imagined, between heat and groceries, between mending and replacing. Yet the apartment was filled with laughter, with small celebrations over minor victories, with genuine affection that William realized he'd never known even in his mansion. Watching them navigate poverty with dignity taught him more about strength than any business lesson ever had. Naomi amazed him with her maturity. Despite hand-me-down clothes and simple sandwiches, she never complained. She threw herself into studies with fierce determination, often staying up late at the kitchen table by a single lamp while Martha sewed nearby. "I'm going to college someday," she told him with certainty. "I'll study to be a teacher and help other kids who don't have much money get good educations too." Her faith infected William's outlook. If this child could hope in hardship, what excuse did he have for despair? 3 months after that first night on their couch, William had saved enough to rent a small room in a boarding house 6 blocks away. It wasn't much, just a bed, a dresser, and a hot plate, but it was his own space, earned through honest labor. Martha and Naomi helped him move his few possessions, mostly donated clothes and a handful of books from his former life. Standing in the tiny room, William felt something he hadn't in months: genuine pride in an accomplishment of his own. "You did it," Naomi said, bouncing with excitement. "You have your own place now, just like a real grown-up." William knelt, emotion thick in his throat. "We did it," he corrected gently. "I couldn't have gotten here without you and your grandmother. You saved my life." As they walked back toward the Brooks building, Martha linked her arm through his, a gesture of acceptance that meant more than any contract he had ever signed. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "The real work starts now." William nodded, understanding. He had learned to survive, now he needed to learn to live again. And that, he was beginning to see, had everything to do with the connections you built with people who truly mattered. The months that followed were marked by steady, incremental progress that felt more meaningful than any of the dramatic successes of his former life. William threw himself into his warehouse job with a dedication that surprised his supervisors and earned the respect of his co-workers. Within 6 months, he was promoted to shift supervisor, a modest raise, but also responsibility for training new employees. The work was demanding, yet William found unexpected satisfaction in the simple mechanics of efficient operations. He created systems for tracking inventory, improved loading procedures that reduced injuries, and guided new workers with patience. For the first time, he was solving problems not for profit margins or shareholders, but to make life easier for people working hard for modest wages. Evenings were divided between community college classes in business management and time with the Brooks family. Their relationship had evolved into something that felt remarkably like family. He ate dinner with them twice a week, helped Naomi with increasingly complex homework, and became Martha's unofficial handyman for household repairs. When Martha's arthritis flared during a harsh winter, William quietly took over her sewing work, learning to operate her old Singer machine with the patience she had once shown him. When Naomi needed school supplies, he found ways to provide them that preserved Martha's dignity, claiming discounts or bulk purchases so help never felt like charity. These small deceptions were acts of love, and all of them knew it. After 2 years of saving, William made a decision that would have seemed impossible on his first desperate night at their apartment. Using his savings and a small community loan, he opened Harris Delivery Services, a modest operation serving small businesses that couldn't afford the rates of major carriers. He worked out of a rented garage with one used van and second-hand equipment. The model was simple, reliable service, fair prices, long-term relationships. Growth was slow but steady, built on word of mouth. Martha kept the books, her sharp eye catching costly errors. Naomi, now 11, organized his filing system with precision that impressed even his few visitors. Success was no longer measured in millions, but in something more satisfying, building something sustainable that supported his community and the people he had come to love. One evening, after signing 3 new clients, William found Naomi waiting on the old park bench where they had first met. Taller now, her childish roundness fading, her smile still carried the same warmth that had saved him years earlier. "I brought you something," she said, offering a wrapped mint candy. William took it, his throat tightening as memories flooded back, the hunger, despair, the certainty that his life was over, and a child's single act of generosity that had begun his return to humanity. "What's this for?" he asked. "Because I wanted you to remember," she said seriously. "That night you were so sad and hungry, you almost didn't take it, you were too proud. But it was the only help you had." He unwrapped the mint, tasting the cool sweetness of a moment that had changed everything. "Why is it important to remember?" he asked softly. "Because sometimes people think being poor or broken means you have nothing to give," Naomi answered with wisdom far beyond her years. "But that's not true. We always have something, even if it's just a piece of candy, or a bowl of soup, or a place to sleep. Sometimes the smallest thing changes someone's whole life." William sat beside her, looking across the park where joggers and families moved through the long evening light. The bench where he once contemplated giving up was now a place of peace. "You saved my life," he said. "You and your grandmother, you took in a stranger with nothing but problems, and you showed me what real wealth is." Naomi leaned against his shoulder. "You saved ours too. Grandma doesn't worry about money every night anymore. And I'm not scared if she gets sick. You made us safe." It was true. William's modest success had ensured the Brooks family's security, not through charity, which Martha's pride would never accept, but through partnership, employment, and the natural bonds of chosen family. As they sat together watching the Manhattan skyline glow in the fading sun, William reflected on the strange alchemy of loss and recovery that had carried him here. Once he measured success by bank accounts, possessions, and social standing. Now he measured it by a girl's laughter, an old woman's trust, and the knowledge that he had built something meaningful from ruins. Martha appeared at the edge of the park, walking slowly but steadily, moving with the dignity of someone who had learned to conserve her strength for what truly mattered. Now in her late 60s, she called, "Ready for dinner? I made that stew you both like, and I've got news. Mrs. Patterson's grandson is graduating medical school next month." William and Naomi rose together. As they walked toward her, William felt the profound satisfaction of belonging to matter to people who mattered to him. The man who once owned penthouses and commanded hundreds of employees had found something infinitely more valuable, a family bound not by blood, but by the radical decision to care for one another through prosperity and poverty, triumph and loss. As Martha took his arm with the ease of years of shared meals and mutual support, William understood he had finally learned the difference between having everything and having enough. Enough, it turned out, was more than he had ever dreamed possible. The mint dissolved slowly on his tongue, carrying with it all the small kindnesses that had brought him here. Some gifts, he now knew, were too valuable to measure in any currency. They were measured only in the lives they touched, the hope they restored, the love they created in unlikely places. Walking between Martha and Naomi as the last light faded from the spring sky, William thought about the business articles he used to read on turnaround strategies. None of them had mentioned the most important element: sometimes salvation comes not from within, but from the unexpected generosity of strangers who become family. 3 years later, standing in the small but growing warehouse of Harris Delivery Services, William watched Martha training a new employee while Naomi, now 14, organized shipments with practiced efficiency. Sometimes he thought of writing his own business article. Its title would be The Mint Strategy: How a 50-cent Candy Changed My Life and Taught Me the True Meaning of Success. But he never wrote it. Some stories he had learned are too precious for corporate wisdom or motivational speeches. Some truths must be lived, passed on through acts of kindness, like a piece of candy, a bowl of soup, or a warm couch on a cold night. In his wallet, behind his driver's license, he kept the original mint wrapper. It reminded him daily that even the smallest gesture of compassion can change a life forever, and that those who have the least to give often give the most from their hearts.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.